Welcome back. Well, we are talking about the family cottage. It's your happy place. It's been in the family for years and you want to keep it that way. But passing down a family cottage or vacation home to children can be sometimes complicated, and if not handled properly, can lead to some squabbles. Ian Lebane is wills and estate planner from TD Wealth. He's here to walk us through some of those potential complications. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you, Kim.
We were just talking with Diane, of course, all these great properties that are available right across the country. And one thing she mentioned, one trend she saw is a lot of, people looking at ways to pass the cottage down and doing it earlier. Mm-hmm. We won't get that right away, but is leaving the cottage in your will to your family enough? Are we done?
It can be, but often it's not.
Okay. When is it not enough to do that?
Well, if there's going to be disagreements as to who should own the cottage, if more than one child wants it, if there's a big tax liability attached to it, which is actually one of the biggest issues I deal with, because that can really strain the rest of the estate. So if you want the cottage to go to one of the beneficiaries or shared intact, there's a tax burden.
So let's talk about that. So can you just give me a couple examples? Like, what kind of tax burden are you talking about?
A lot of people bought cottages in the the 50s and 60s for really low amounts, and they've really appreciated, especially in some of the areas. And I'm sure you heard about the earlier segment. So the government taxes it on the accrued gains. So the cost base as of 1972. And you can imagine how low that can be to what it's worth today, the fair market value on the death.
75,000 to who knows, $1 million.
Millions of dollars.
Yeah. So what do you do then? How do you manage that?
Well, one of the ways, and one of the growing ways, I think, is life insurance.
Okay.
So especially if both spouses own the cottage, and are passing it down, they can buy life insurance called joint last to die on the second death, which is often more economical to buy it that way, and that's when the tax liability is due. Right. So that way you've now matched when the insurance benefit proceeds are paid into the estate to when the tax liability is due. So that's one way. Another way is to give it to the children early, give them a little advance on their inheritance. Okay. So you're prepaying some of the tax, but if the property's going up and up, you're kind of arresting that growth, and that you're foisting the rest of the capital gains on the new owners, the new generation.
What are the pitfalls?
Well, one of them is sometimes the kids have creditors. So now there's an asset that the creditors can realize on. Sometimes they'll have spouses. Right. And then if the marriage breaks up and they're a quarter owner of this cottage, then that can become part of the marital family dispute.
Okay, so I'm writing these down as we go. So let's talk about creditors first. Sure. So how do you protect against your children's creditors on that asset? Because the last thing
I get asked a lot.
I know, because you don't want your cottage taken away from you because of what's happening with your kids.
Well, one of the ways is, and it's you like simple questions, I like simple answers. When possible, is just to have a mortgage, have a family a take-back mortgage. It doesn't have to bear interest, but it can be. And I advise this to clients that are just helping their children buy a home, even apart from a cottage, is if you're giving them money, or in this case giving them a part or all of the cottage, take a mortgage back for the value, and then that's secured. So then the creditors or spouses, whatever happens, you can always get that money back because you're secured with that mortgage. Right. The increase will accrue to them. Right. But you'll at least get they'll be protected to an extent, and you'll be protected.
Right. Now, what about the issue of not spouses but ex-spouses? So you give it to your children, the marriage dissolves. Let's say it's acrimonious. I mean, who knows? But I mean, the ex-spouse tries to take a claim, and this is not a question of rightfully, wrongfully. So not getting into that. But how do you manage that?
There are clauses in a will. If you're leaving it to a married beneficiary in a will, you can put a clause in the will that the increase or the income isn't shared, and if you gift it to them during your life in marriage, you can put something in there that any income from the property. So this isn't just cottage property, this is any property. Right. The capital value is excluded, married beneficiaries. The real issue is when you give it to a child that's unmarried and then they get married after. There's less protection there, and they should do a prenup.
Right, and so that's something you would want, you know, in an ideal world, if you're trying to protect the cottage, you would have that put into the prenup. Ask your children to put that into the prenup. I'm sure all these interesting conversations.
It's a tough one.
Over the dinner table at the cottage, I'm sure you could have these things. Yep. What are other, I would say, typical bumps that I think the people face in situations like this? I mean, you've run through quite a few of them in terms of how people manage them, but are there others?
I think sometimes overestimating the value that the kids put on having the cottage when the parents are gone. So the parents love the cottage, they think the kids love it, the kids do go up there, but one of the reasons the kids are so enamored of it is because the parents are paying all the expenses, not just there, but covering it, the repairs, they don't have to think about it. I see this with my own kids. And then suddenly when it's in the estate and the parents aren't there, and there's all these complicated will clauses about the kids getting it and one kid buying it, they don't really want it. So as often as not, I'll say to the client, just sell it. And if one of your children wants to buy it, they can just buy it from the estate like any third party, and they can take it off their inheritance. If there's a lot of, that's easier when there's substantial other assets. Right. So if a child's getting a big inheritance, they can either buy their own cottage or buy the one that their parents has left in the will.
But if there isn't a lot of substantial assets, it becomes a trickier conversation, I'm sure.
Then it's a trickier, if it represents a large part of the estate, then you're into what you might want to get a co-ownership agreement, so you can leave it to your kids in the will, as we call it, tenants in common. That's the legal parlance, but really it just means co-owners. And I would recommend you get a co-ownership agreement. I've had situations where, let's say there's two brothers and one of them was a teacher. He was there in the summer all the time. And the other brother was a busy executive and was never there. But the expenses were split. So you have one, so you have these tensions. And then if one wants to get out, and the other doesn't want to sell, how does the one get his money out?
So the devil's in the details in this. It's all in terms of how managing and having, I think, really honest and open conversations about how to manage this stuff. Ian, that was fantastic. Thanks for the information.
Oh, you're welcome.
Ian Lebane, he's a will and estate planner with Wealth Advisory Services at TD Wealth. All right.